Thank you so much for joining our second Winter Inclusion School session on women through the leadership lens. And I can see on the participants number count that we have exceeded 100 people turning up today. We are expecting more than 150 of you today, and I think that's tremendous and is indicative of just how seriously we all take inclusion, and in particular here within Staffordshire, and never more so than during these very challenging times of the pandemic. So to give you a little bit of context about these inclusion schools, this is the second of our inclusion schools. The purpose is to develop our understanding of inclusion. It's around having that rich conversation. Yes, it is about talking. Talking is very important in terms of how we all connect with each other and how we all take collective responsibility for the actions that we need to take moving forward. And very importantly, for health care delivery, that by its very nature is inclusive by intention. So who am I? I am Shajeda Ahmed. I am I am the Director of People for North Staffordshire Combined Healthcare, but equally I am also the Programme Director for Systems Leadership and Organisational Development in the system. And I think the slides just come up with a much younger looking photograph of me, shall I say. So essentially what that means is that I, along with system partners and colleagues, many of whom are in the room today, work on people and cultural development issues for the Staffordshire system. Now, as a person, in case you've not been able to ascertain this, I am very passionate about inclusion within the workplace because our society is multicultural, and very much in particular around creating local healthcare where everyone has positive experiences and equal chances of the very best outcomes possible. So we all know, in terms of what the media tells us, etc., that health inequalities is a big issue for us all to be collectively looking at how we address. So as I said, our second session, our first session was held in November of last year. That was focused on race inclusion. And for those of you who attended that, you'll have heard me speak about my own personal experiences as a second generation British Bangladeshi Muslim woman who grew up in the 1970s and 80s in Walsall, and some of the challenges that I had to deal with in terms of being perceived as different by many of my peers, many of my school students, etc., and just very much how tough it was in terms of the 70s and the 80s. But for today, we're here to focus on the last part of that list of identities that I've just mentioned, the female gender. And when we talk about inclusion, it is really important to note that we are all the sum of our many parts and identities, and no one single aspect stands alone. And in the diversity and inclusion world, we call this intersectionality. So today, I will be hosting a conversation with our invited guests. Now, unfortunately, Ranjit Sangira from NHS England is not here to join us. But nonetheless, we have three courageous and very different women leaders who I will introduce shortly to you. And in terms of you, our audience today, this is made up of men and women, perhaps some non-binary individuals who represent a wide range of backgrounds, cultures, faiths, nationalities, and personalities. And this is important because individually we're all unique. Collectively, we're human, and as much as we celebrate what shares and what unites us, we also need to very much value that individuality, which is a strength that needs to be nurtured and to be learned from. So that's what today is about in terms of where we are. Please do use today as an opportunity to consider how you can change things and how you would challenge gender bias and inequality. Because whilst we agree that, the world has moved on, and it has considerably moved on, sexism does unfortunately still exist in the workplace, even if it is in less blatant forms than before. So what this does mean is that collectively we all do need to raise our game and choose to challenge gender bias and inequality, because we do need to vocalise the fact we need a more equitable society. So before I hand over to our speakers, what I did want to do is quickly introduce them. We have with us today Tracy Bullock, who is the Chief Executive of University Hospital North Midlands. We also have Gaynor Walker, who is the Senior Programme Manager from NHS England, the East Midlands region, and Dr. Clare Price-Dowd, who is the Head of Leadership and Lifelong Learning for the Midlands region from NHS England. And what I would like to say is a heartfelt thanks to these very inspirational leaders for taking time out of what is a very busy day, I know, a very busy time for us all in terms of joining us today. And what Tracy and Gaynor are going to both do is share a little bit of their personal stories. And then what we're going to try and do as seamlessly as is possible is they are going to join myself and Claire for a sofa chat, a sofa conversation. And we're going to have a chat about thoughts, ideas, women in leadership roles. Without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Tracy to share her story with us. If I could please, Tracy.
Thank you, Shajeda. And hello, everyone. Good afternoon. So first thing to say is I don't think there's anything particularly inspirational about my story, whilst recognising that it isn't what we would refer to as a common or normal route. So I'll shut up preambling and I'll get on with it. So what I'm going to do is just spend the next 10 minutes or so just telling you a little bit about me and how I got to being where I am, which is quite indulgent actually. So thank you for listening. But the first thing that I would say is I was born to a very, very poor family and come from, a council house background. Where actually, the norm was being cold and being hungry. So poverty was a big part of my life. And with that, I obviously had a very different type of upbringing to many chief execs who people imagine come from universities, Oxford, Cambridge, middle class backgrounds, etc. That certainly wasn't the kind of background that I had, but my background certainly did shape what I became in life and what I wanted to do with myself. So born into that poor background, 2 brothers, 3 sisters. So my mum's attention was very much divided between us. And actually what I would say is all of my siblings have grown up without any formal qualifications. So I was the first one in our family to get any kind of qualification. And I had the same upbringing as all of them. Why was I different and where was I different? I'm not really sure. The only thing I can pin it down to is, although I wouldn't have thought about this as a 4-year-old little girl, is around having aspiration and ambition. Because from the age of 4, all I ever wanted to be was a nurse. And that was the aspiration that I had. Someone bought me as a small child, or I had access to a little uniform, a little nurse's uniform, and a little plastic first aid kit. And from that day forward, I knew that all I wanted to be was a nurse. So having that aspiration, and that stayed with me throughout school, and that drove me as well, because I knew that to achieve that aspiration, I needed a certain amount of qualifications. So I went through secondary school, and in the good old days when I went through secondary school, it was CSEs. I didn't do particularly outstanding with my CSEs. They were very average, if you like, but they were just enough to get me into secondary school, into college, sorry. And I went on a pre-nursing course. From there, I was then, my mum's proudest moment was when I applied for and got to be a nurse. And again, I started nursing in the early 80s, I think it was 83. So I've been about 37 years in the NHS now. So that's when I started nursing. And once I very established what the hierarchy was. The only aspiration and ambition that I had then was to get my hands on that navy blue crop. I just wanted to become a ward manager, a ward sister. And I worked very, very hard. And one of the things that I would say in terms of being key enablers for me throughout my career in the early days, and now even later in life, the key to success is around people and relationships, and the ability to be able to develop those and work with those, and obviously continuing with that aspiration. And one thing that I always did in every role that I've had was give 100%. I worked incredibly hard. I never took anything for granted, and I grasped every single opportunity that came my way. And in many respects, and what my mum used to always say about me and people that I met was, I was always curious, and still and remain curious about everything, curious about everyone. I was the little girl that sat in the house, and no matter what I got bought for Christmas, birthdays, whatever, I would take it apart. And even if it wasn't mine, I would take it apart. I just had such curiosity and needed to know how things worked, what made things tick. So I was always very curious and always asked heaps of questions. And I know many mums who have the children that say, but why, but why, but why, and go on for years and years hearing that. I'm afraid I was very much one of those people. One of the other things that I very quickly realised that was going to be successful to me was about being passionate. So I am always passionate about what I do, and the NHS, and I absolutely adore working for the NHS. I still bounce out of bed every morning and come to work, and feel very proud to work in the NHS. Don't get me wrong, I have difficult days, and sometimes I have very bad days, and I can have my head in my hands and feel like having a good cry like the rest of us. But generally, I'm always very passionate. And in the words of Martin Luther King, be passionate, for passion persuades. And if we're not passionate about what we do and how we do it, why would anybody else? Why would anybody else be? So I became very quickly rose through the ranks of nursing to being a ward manager. And what I learned when I became a ward manager was that there was a lot of, in my eyes at that time, a lot of numpty managers above me that would make decisions, tell me what to do, how to do things, and I felt it was not the right thing. So from my point of view, I felt I needed to progress and to go into those higher leadership roles, management roles, and in many respects, show them the error of their ways, and become a better leader, become a better manager. And actually, when I took up those leadership positions, what I found was actually it wasn't them, it wasn't their fault. They were being driven by other things, by national requirements. So I went off and joined the national data set, or the national people. And went working for them for a number of years. But what I actually realised, and what I came round to thinking, is the key place that you can make a difference for our patients is actually at the bedside, and actually when you're in that face-to-face contact with people. So I very quickly came back to the NHS. Well, I was still in the NHS, but came back to an acute hospital environment. In a senior leadership role as a director of nursing, and actually, and that's where I enjoyed the team working. I enjoyed getting visible and closer to the front line again. And one of the other things that I feel has helped me in my career, and is easily to spot in other people, is if people are not authentic. So authenticity is something that is probably one of the most valuable things that you can have in the NHS, because if you're not authentic, people absolutely splice through that straight away. And it's like the bank account. For every good deed that you do, you put £1 in the bank account. You only need to do or say something wrong or not live up to your word on one occasion, and it completely empties that bank account, and you're almost starting again. And the other thing that I talk to myself about is what is the legacy that I want to leave behind? And then having a quiet word with myself about, am I living up to that legacy? So if I want to be considered a compassionate leader, if I want to be considered as a chief executive who's made a difference, then am I doing what I need to do to make and doing it consistently? Am I doing that consistently so that people will, so that I will then live with that legacy? And the other thing that I think is really important is around compassionate leadership. So everybody, and I think that's where sometimes women in leadership have perhaps been on the back foot. No disrespect to our male colleagues, but I think perhaps the women are considered softer than men. But actually, you know, I do believe in tough love, and I can be, you know, a strong if I need to be. I can be tough if I need to be. But actually, I think you get far, far more out of people if you demonstrate compassion, if you show that you care about them and what they're doing. So I started off as a director of nursing in Mid-Cheshire, and that was in 2006. And I became a chief executive in 2010. And right up until me applying for that first chief executive post, if anyone had have asked me if I ever saw myself as a chief executive, I would have just laughed at them and said, no, I have no, I do not want to do that. I've seen what it does. I've seen the hours, and I don't think I can do it as well. I think there is something about being a female, coming from the background that I did, going to a secondary school, not having high degrees of qualifications, did actually leave me with a little bit of an imposter and lacking in confidence. And I always, throughout the whole of my career, felt I was never as good as the other chief executives. I'd sit at, first time I was a chief executive and I went to a regional meeting and I sat in a room of fellow chief executives. I just sat there on the honour table and thought, I'm not as bright as them. I'm not worthy of having this position here on this table. I can't run an organisation like they can. Actually, my view of that has changed and has changed significantly because I've realised that what does create successful leaders is, again, going back to those relationships and remaining connected to the front line. Now, in some respects, that's been easier for me because of my nursing background. So I am incredibly visible as a chief executive. I probably spend about 30% of my time talking to staff and talking to patients. Many chief execs would say, well, how do you find the time to do that? My response to that is you cannot afford not to do that because what you gain from developing those relationships is priceless. So you can read all the leadership theory that you want to, you can put all the tools and into your kit bag that you want to, but if you cannot build the relationships, if you are not credible in the eyes of your employees, then you're not going to be a successful leader. So it was that about keeping the connection with the front line and with patients as well. So I never go into a ward area without talking to patients. My biggest desire when I joined UH&M, which was about 18 months ago, was to understand what it feels like to work here and what it feels like to be a patient here. And yes, there are many surveys, there are many things that you can look at, dashboards that tell you about patient experience, staff experience, etc., etc. But in my eyes, the key to doing that is going out there and giving it a prod and a pull. Going talking to people, and seeing effectively seeing how it pokes you back, and if it knocks you over, you know there's something not quite right there. So go and talk to people, and that's where the 30% comes in. So I spend an awful lot of time going out there talking to people to understand those two questions. And it's only through understanding those that you can actually start to make a difference and start putting things right. I've struggled, the main struggle I've had being a woman has not been because of other people, it's been because of myself and my own lack of confidence. And if you do read the leadership theory, we all know that tall, handsome men are always deemed better leaders than short, dumpy females like me. So, you know, yeah, you know that's what the leadership theory tells you. So on that basis, you know that you have to put in a little bit of extra effort. But what I would say, being a woman, never got in the way of me progressing. I think I worked hard enough. I developed the right relationships, and where opportunity arose, I grasped it. And the people that I'd worked with, because of how hard I worked, allowed me those opportunities, and I took those opportunities. So, in a nutshell, that's how I became a chief executive. My core values have never changed. My top tips as a leader have never changed. And I think some of you will have heard me say this before, but my top tips as a leader are about relationships and conversations and making them good ones. And I've said that repeatedly. And that to me is genuinely where I come from. Now, I'm not going to, I know I'd only got about 10 minutes anyway, and I'm not sure how long I've talked for, and I could talk forever. So that's just a little snapshot about me, about my career, about how I got to being where I am, and some of the thoughts and feelings that I've had on my journey to becoming a chief executive. And I hope that there'll be some questions or comments throughout the course of the afternoon.
Thank you, Tracy. I think there's been overwhelming comments in the chat box in terms of your story. And I look forward to having the conversation later. In the interest of time, I'm going to invite Gaynor on now to share her story with us. If I could, please, Gaynor.
You can if you want to.
I do want to. Thank you. Welcome.
Good afternoon. Hi. Shall I just start talking? Okay. So,
yes, thank you.
My name is Maggie Walker, and I am an equality and health inequalities lead within NHS England and NHS Improvement. So I sit at that national level, the people that you all guys love to speak nicely about. So I'm from Leeds originally. Obviously, I'm Black, so my heritage is my mum's from St. Kitts, my dad's from Jamaica. So I have got mixed heritage, but I was born here, so I am classed as Black British. What can I say? My childhood was not a traditional childhood in what most people would have. So I was born in Chapeltown, which is a deprived area of Leeds. Not so deprived anymore, but it was a deprived area when I was born. So I was born in 1981. Went to school at Lytton Grange High School, and let's just say I was a bit mouthy. I would challenge all the time, and especially around things that were not challengeable. So I do remember saying to my teachers and asking them to explain the Holy Trinity when we was doing RE, and how can 3 people be 1 and 1 people be 3? Can you just explain that a bit further? And I pressed it and I pressed it, and then I got pressed out the door. And I realized that actually I asked too many questions, but it was something that was in my DNA. So I just continued to do that. When I left school, I thought I was going to be a movie producer. So I've got a qualification in film and television production. I'm a qualified TV producer. And I thought that I was going to go out there and be the next Spike Lee. I was really heading for it. I applied for the New York Film School. I actually got in and then bottled it. It was just too hard. I was still living in Leeds. I had my own flat, but I was going to my mum's and my grandma's to eat. I was buying my own stuff. I just didn't have to do the things that a normal person would have to do responsibility wise. And when I was given the opportunity to act like a responsible adult, I said no. So I ended up not doing that. And I ended up started working in the NHS as an agency staff. So I actually come from a blue family. What do I mean by that? So when my grandmother came from the Caribbean, after doing a stint as a seamstress, she went and became an auxiliary nurse at Leeds Teaching Hospitals. And she only retired due to ill health. And then my mum, she went to work at Leeds Teaching Hospitals, and she ran the X-ray department for some time over there. But then she left. She's now a qualified travel agent. So she left, and that was unfortunately due to racism and bullying. And so now here I am sat within NHS England and Improvement, the strategic body for the NHS. And I'm trying to continue that line of staying a blue family. So started off just doing generic admin, and I was working for my mum, and being the person that I was, she sacked me pretty quick and asked me to go and work somewhere else, because as far as I was concerned, I went to work and you was mum, and I'm going home and I'm mum. So I was expecting the same kind of response. And I think this was the first lesson that I had in regards to carrying myself correctly in a professional environment within an NHS environment. So I moved on and I did various different bits of work. Worked in a PCT. I did a stint in mental health, all doing administration. And then I met my husband, and he lived in Birmingham. So I was faced with, what do I need to do? And I ended up moving to Birmingham. So those of you that know me from Birmingham. I'm over Midlands and the east of England in my role at the moment. I'm just going to say really quickly, I'm really sorry. I know I'm moving around a lot. I'm fidgety. I'm not used to having the camera on, and I'm not very comfortable with this. So please bear with me. So I moved down to Birmingham. But actually, when I moved down to Birmingham, I had in my head that I was going to come down and work for the BBC. So I applied for a job, and I actually got the role. And when I turned up, after moving everything that I owned down to Birmingham to the BBC down on Broad Street, I found out that actually they'd removed the job and they'd taken the job away from me. And subsequently later on down the line, I found out that they'd actually given it to the person that was employing me, they'd given it to their niece. And I think that was probably the first time when I realized that there was inequality out there, because there was no real reason for that to have happened. And I didn't really get a proper response. Nobody explained to me why they'd removed me from the role. I hadn't even started. I hadn't even had a first date, anything like that. So that was a experience. So I thought to myself, well, what do I do now? I need to work. So I went back to what I know, and I went back to agency work within the NHS, and eventually I landed a job within the Public Health England, which was the Health Protection Agency at the time. So that's where my NHS journey really started. And that's when I started to look into what I really wanted to do. And I ended up becoming qualified in business continuity and health emergency planning. And I did various jobs in the Health Protection Agency. So actually I was employed as the regional administrator, but it was part-time, and I just had a baby and I needed more money. So I started touting around for bits of work that was in the organisation that people might have been willing to pay for. And at one point, I ended up having 3 jobs in this organisation all at once. So I was the regional administrator. I was also the business continuity manager for something called HP Zone, which was an epidemiological recording system. So I ended up being the business continuity manager for that. But then I also worked for the Chemical Hazards and Poisons division, which was called Chap D. So looking at environmental health, poisonings and that kind of stuff. And that gave me loads of information. It gave me loads of insight. It kind of allowed me to look around and see what was going on. Now, that wouldn't have been possible if it wasn't for a lady by the name of Wendy Clark. Wendy saw something in me. She saw past the gobbiness. She saw past the consistent jokes, which is how that's how I cope. I make a joke out of everything. I'm very rarely serious. So she saw past all of that and really started to take me under her wing. And she was the first person, I think, that opened a door for me and said, yeah, you know, come through, let me help you. So that's one thing that in my career that has happened consistently, is that when I do get my breaks, it's about people opening doors, because I'm not that high up in the NHS at the moment, and maybe in regards to the wider system. So when you're talking about being out there as a nurse or a doctor or in that kind of environment, an acute mental health environment, but actually in NHS England, I'm only a middle manager, so I've still got quite somewhere to go. But the only way I would have been able to get here is by having those people open those doors for me and invite me in. So Wendy was one of the first people to do that. When the Health and Social Care Act of 2012 came in, I was faced with a choice, and my choice was to leave PHE. There were other things going on behind that as well. I unfortunately was going through the breakdown of my marriage, and so I scraped everything up and I went home, and I started working for NHS England, which was the NHS Commissioning Board at the time. And I continued along the vein. So when I came into the organisation, I actually set up Sir Bruce Keogh's directorate. So that was the medical directorate. And a woman that was running that, her name was Carol Wilby, really saw my skills, maybe, or just like the fact that I joked around, and it really helped me to stay where I was, because it was a temporary position, and she really didn't want me to leave. So Carol Wilby was another person that really opened that door for me and made sure that I could understand the mechanisms of NHS England and get myself working in that type of role, because coming out of a regional centre, be it PHE or maybe Health Education England or some other arm's length body, is completely different to working at that national level. So Carol took me under her wing and gave me many opportunities to prove myself. Once I finished working for the medical directorate, I was really lucky in getting one of 2 business continuity jobs. So I was one of 2 business continuity managers for NHS England. And that's probably how I know quite a few people on this call, because I used to travel. No, I still do. I traveled a lot all over the place. But by now, this wasn't fulfilling me anymore. Resilience wasn't fulfilling me anymore. I wasn't getting the same buzz out of doing business continuity and health emergency planning. I didn't feel like I was making a contribution to our population, and I couldn't see the outcomes of what I was dealing with. And that's partially down to the type of work it is. I mean, business continuity, nobody hears about you until there's a problem. And then everybody wants to know your name, like cheers. And it's very much the same in regards to health emergency planning. Nobody really was taking any notice of health emergency planning until you've had a flood, or until, some little known unknown disease comes and disrupts everybody's life. Then everybody knows your name because you're health emergency planning and you're leading the way in that. So I wasn't being fulfilled. And at the same time, I was offered an opportunity to get involved with the BME network. Well, no, I was offered an opportunity to set up a BME network. It was sold to me as an opportunity to join. When I got there was no network. It was just a couple of people, and they were like, "Come on, Gaynor, we've been waiting for you." I was like, "Yeah, you conned me." So I set up the first BME network within NHS England and NHS Movement, and got that going. And I realised that I was really interested in this. I really liked being someone who was fighting for equality, fighting for justice, trying to make sure that the NHS was doing what they were supposed to do. And so I embarked upon my second career and applied for this job that I'm in now, based off of a lot of the work that I did within the BME network, because it was setting it up. It was mechanisms in regards to supporting people that feel that they've been bullied, people that felt that they'd been prejudiced against, etc. So it really gave me a foundation to look and think, actually, there's something out there that I can do and I think not only will it be worthwhile doing, but I am going to get something back from this. So this is where I am now. So I work in health inequalities, and I'm over the Midlands and the East of England region. And Ranjit, who was supposed to be on this call, she's the one that opened the door for me this time. She saw what I was doing in NHS England, and she saw the impact that the BME network was having. And she decided that she wanted a piece of that, and she wanted me to come and be in her team. And so she encouraged me to apply, sent me the information, and I was like, no, thank you. And she was like, oh, come on, please. And I applied and I got the job straight away. And in that, another person has also opened the door for me. So I'm also the Secretariat for the Equality and Diversity Council. So I'm the person that makes sure that the council comes together. They're not standing at the moment. It's just a working group at the moment. But in normal times, I'm the person that makes sure that they get together, that they complete the actions that they've said that they've got to do. A general secretariat role for this particular group of people. And it's Kevin Holton. He opened the door for me on that one. He thinks that I would be the right person to do it, and I think I've proven that I have. I mean, the council is much more active and they're much more engaging with the system that's out there, and I want to do a lot more with that. So I'm glad that I got to mention Kevin, because Wendy Clark and Ranjit Singera, they're Black women. Ranjit's Asian, South Asian origin, but Wendy comes from Barbados. Okay. Carol Wilby's British, but she's a woman. And it was really nice to see a man open the door for me and say, hey, come in, welcome. That's really important. And I found that to be really important. So I don't know how much time I've got left. So I'm going to stop. But what I'll 2 minutes. Okay. So yeah, I don't know where to go with it other than to say, if you see somebody with talent, if you see that somebody can cope, regardless of whether you know them well or not, try and help. Try and open doors for them. I make sure I do that. So I'm a coach, I'm a mentor. I haven't done any in a year, because at the moment I am helping with the incident response. So I actually live on a train. How it feels like it. I go backwards and forwards to London from Birmingham to support the incident response down at Skipton House, using the emergency planning and business continuity skills that I've got to help to respond to this tragic, horrible disease. But what I will say is that we need to be opening doors. So if you're a band 6, open a door for a band 4. If you're a band 8, then open the door for a band 6. That's the only way that this is going to work. And take the time to look past things. So when you meet me, my own impression of what other people see is that I'm loud and brash. I'm from Yorkshire. I say it how it is. A spade's a spade, not a digging apparatus. I don't know how many of you have heard me say that. God knows how many times. I'm also a person that you will hear say, actually an AFC grade is just a band. It's not your intelligence. So when you're looking at somebody and you're looking at the band 4, which is really bad to be naming people like that, it's not the band 4, it's just the person that's applied for a band 4 role. You have no idea if that person has got capabilities to do things at a band 9 level. So please do open doors for people. That's it really from me. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Gaynor. Opening doors and seeing the person as a person and not a band. Really, really inspirational words, and, you know, shining a spotlight on the potential talent when you come across it and helping people to develop and do more. I think that's just absolutely beautiful. So thank you so much. You will see there's lots of chat in the chat box, Gaynor. I am now going to ask Claire to join me on the sofa, and Tracy and Gaynor, but I'm firstly going to ask Claire to tell us a little bit about herself very quickly, a bit about her own personal leadership experience, and also Claire would be really interested in terms of what resonated for you, having heard both Tracy and Gaynor's stories.
Right, so I'm going to start with that actually, Shajeda. And if I wasn't feeling imposter syndrome before I started, I'm certainly feeling it now and thinking, how am I going to follow on from either of those two fantastic women? But there's so much that resonated for me. I have to say, you know, the BBC's loss is definitely the NHS's gain in terms of us having Gaynor working with us. And I was just also really sad that her mum had left because of bullying and racism, and we still see that continue today. But what struck me about both Tracy and Gaynor is the resilience of them, and the way that they are both curious and have absolute dedication. When Tracy talked about being passionate and being full of pride for what she does, but also both talked about having being vulnerable and having bad days and just wanting to cry. we don't think of our chief executives and our senior leaders as having those bad days. We look to them to be the strong people. And it's quite a wake-up call to think that, you know, while we're putting pressure on our senior leaders to be the strong ones, that they too are ones needing health and well-being and support and our compassion and our kindness. The other thing that really struck me from listening to both Gaynor and Tracy was the difference in trajectories and how they got to be where they were. And Tracy had a plan, being very small, from the nurse's uniform as a small child. She knew exactly what she wanted to be. Gaynor also has been fantastically successful, but with no plan whatsoever, and just seemed to have you know, gone where her passion or her circumstances took her, but still managed to be that fantastic role model, brilliant senior leader. So they're the key things that I'm taking away from this. And also that the key place to make a difference is at the bedside. And that is so, so important, that there is a patient behind everything that everybody on this call does every day. It might not be the first, you know, the patient might not be our first everyday contact, but somewhere there is a patient in everything that we do.
Thank you, Claire. Tracy, I actually have a question for you, and it's one that struck me as you were talking, and it's one that's been raised by a colleague of mine as well. So, you know, you talked about wanting to be a nurse from the age of 4, and it's absolutely amazing the way you've achieved what you have. But were there any sacrifices you had to make in terms of achieving your career aspirations?
I suppose the biggest sacrifice was, so I'm not the most educated, as I said, and I had to work very, very hard for every single qualification that I got. So whilst my friends were all playing out during school years, I made myself stay in and study. And there was nobody pushed me to do that. My mum didn't push me because we didn't come from those kind of backgrounds where education was really important. So I had to push myself. So that was the sacrifice that I made. I didn't go out and play as much with my friends. I could hear them all out in the sunshine in the garden playing, and I'd be in my bedroom. So I think they thought I was a little bit odd.
Thank you, Tracy. And Gaynor, as a Black female leader, you know, you've taken us through your life story, and you talked about how you moved to Birmingham, etc. I'm going to use the infamous 2 words, glass ceiling. Do you think we've moved on significantly?
No.
At all, or do you think it's still a real issue?
The glass ceiling, the glass ceiling is a massive issue for us as females, but then also as females of colour, and there is a difference between the two. For me, I think the glass ceiling really does depend on the culture of the organisation, and all too often the culture of the organisation is male. I won't say the full, because I don't like it when they say male stale, but male, yeah, white males that are out there and not really looking over the shoulder. And I don't think it's intentional, to be honest with you. I think sometimes they just don't realize. It's just they're in a rhythm. They're going to employ somebody. They're not used to looking for people that are not like them. They're not used to looking outside of the box. But in regards to the glass ceiling, that's there and it's strong.
Okay, thank you. And Tracy, I'd be curious as to your views on that as well. You know, being a female chief executive, having shared your story about having attended your first meeting and lots of male chief execs in the room, I just wondered what you thought, recognizing that, you know, this huge inclusion agenda, you know, as organizations, we're trying to do so much around it, and what it is about this glass ceiling that we need to do further to try and eradicate it.
So the first thing I would say is I'm probably slightly more positive in terms of the woman, but whether that's because I'm now a woman in a very senior leadership position, it can make those things happen for people. You know, I don't know whether that's the difference, the lens that I look at it from. And what I would say now is if I walked into that same room full of senior leaders now, I would find a good proportion being women. So since I started as a chief executive some 13 years ago, where it was male dominated, there are far more women and far more clinical leaders as well. And I mean clinical in the broadest sense as well. I know doctors, nurses, pharmacists, therapists, who are all clinical leaders now. So I do think that, but having said that, I agree with Gaynor in the we're not where we need to be. There's still a long journey ahead of us, and still an awful lot to do. And I think the only way that we can do that is to call it out and say it when we see it happening. But to do that, people need to feel confident and that you will do something about it. They need to trust you, that you'll treat it in the way that it's meant. And I think that's quite a difficult thing at the moment. Certainly, I've been in UH&M now for 18 months, and the culture isn't where I want it to be. But it is, it's starting to change, but that takes a long time. But I know that there's a lot of people in this organisation who don't yet wholly trust me. Chief executives in UH&M are viewed as transient. So in the last 6 years, there's probably been as many chief executives. So people would think, why should I invest in Tracy? Why should I trust Tracy? She's not going to be around long enough, to make a difference, really. But having said that, one thing that I think I've overcome is because of the relationship that I've started to build with staff. Actually, they do believe that I can make a difference. It's now just whether they, in their mind, whether I'm going to be here long enough. Because quite often that's something that they talk to me about.
Okay, thank you. Claire, I did wonder from a national perspective around leadership and development, and Tracy's touched about compassionate leadership, Gaynor's talked about inclusion a lot in terms of when we look at our leadership across the wider NHS social care lens, what some of those plans are to try and develop those skills more so across all of our leadership.
In terms of developing more compassionate and inclusive leadership, I think we have to start with ourselves, and we have to start with role modelling. One of the challenges is when you're developing people, and it's part of a leadership development pathway, and we talk about compassion and inclusion, and people go back and they see their own senior leaders just not modelling and being those authentic leaders that we want them to be. Yet we see people being very successful who are not compassionate and who are not inclusive, and they seem to thrive and do very well. And in the past that we have promoted people for being pace setting and cut and thrust and obsessed with targets. We haven't promoted people for being compassionate and soft and caring about and caring for. So we have to start with ourselves as leaders. We have to start with role modelling, and that has to be genuine and authentic. We have to do it every day, not just when we're not busy. We have to show it when we're the most busy and the most stressed, and we don't return to type. And it has to be something that we promote with everybody, and we call it out in our teams if we see it not happening. So it becomes, this is what we do, and this is how we are with each other when we do our hardest work. It has to start with us.
Thank you, Claire. I am mindful of time, but I'm going to ask both Tracy and Gaynor, how do you remain so resilient, so charged in terms of where we find ourselves in the world at the moment, in terms of the roles that you hold? How do you stay so grounded?
So how do I stay charged? And there's a question in the chat box, a couple of questions really. How I keep my energy and my battery charged, and how do I take care of my own well-being? I think the first thing that I would say is my biggest critic is me. There is nobody harder on me than myself. So I think that's the first thing that I would say. The second thing, the thing that keeps me energized and keeps me going are people. So you do, as a chief exec, I sometimes sit in my office and I can feel my shoulders going down. You see all the things that are difficult, you see all the things that are going wrong, and everything that's a problem comes across your desk, and sometimes my shoulders slumped by the end of the day. And you just think, oh, what am I going to do here? And I always, without fail, take myself off, go out there into the wards and departments, talk to staff, talk to patients, and I never ever fail to come back uninspired by what people are doing out there, and feeling positive about the world and what a difference that we are making for our patients. So for me, what charges me and what keeps me inspired is people, and in particular our staff in our clinical areas.
Tracy, Gaynor?
I would say my family kind of keep me motivated in the fact that we are an NHS family. We believe in the NHS. We don't, I mean, the countries that I originate from, or that my family originate from, they don't have access to that kind of stuff. So we really, really genuinely, you know, appreciate it and love it and want to keep it going. But in this particular role as well, I'd say definitely my regions. So the working with people, Leslie, Granville, Jagtar, loads of people, you know, just working with them, connecting with them, seeing how badly they want things to change makes me want to, because I always say I serve them. So NHS, I'm probably going to get shot for this. NHS England serves the regions and the locals, and then in order for you to be able to deliver your job, we've got to be able to deliver it so that you've got it. And I that's how I see it. I see it as that we're serving them. So just being in service to these people, and when they come back and they're like, oh, that was great, thank you, or you really helped me out, or I didn't know about that, that just makes me feel like I'm doing something, like I'm contributing to the health of this nation. So that's what keeps me going.
Thank
and
you.
Coffee.
Thank you, Gaynor. Now, before I hand over to the wonderful audience for questions, I'm just going to very quickly ask you all, what are the words that you would say to those budding chief execs in our audience today? What would you say to them? I'm going to start with Tracy, being that you're already a chief exec.
So I would say go for it. You know, that's all I could say. Go for it and build the relationships and just check that you've got the support and you've got the people there. And you know, if you've worked hard, if you've done the right things, if you've built that legacy, you should be able to achieve.
Thank you. Claire?
I was going to say, don't let anybody tell you you can't, that there is no seat at the table for you. I think it's, they bring your own chair. If there wasn't one, bring your own chair. Just don't let anybody tell you you can't.
Thank you. And Gaynor?
I'll just say do it with a clean heart. You know what I mean? If you're going to go into that kind of thing, do it for the right reasons. You know, don't do it for just for yourself, because you're going to let people down, and that's just going to make it worse for the other 1.3 million people that work in the system.
Yeah.